On Capitol Hill, Mike Johnson sneered at Dallas, dragging Jasmine Crockett's hometown through the mud as a burden to America. But Jasmine struck back like thunder, transforming that insult into a battle cry, turning Dallas into a symbol of strength, survival, and pride. Under the blinding lights where humiliation meets defiance, who shatters first, Jasmine Crockett or Mike Johnson? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The hearing was electric, the atmosphere sharp with tension as lawmakers locked eyes across the chamber. At the witness table sat two figures destined for collision. Speaker Mike Johnson, polished suit and cold smirk, carried himself like a man convinced of his own superiority. Across from him was Jasmine Crockett, files stacked at her side, a fighter's glare burning behind calm composure. Every camera lens tightened, waiting for the inevitable clash. Johnson leaned back, lips curling into a cruel grin. He let out a harsh laugh, his words slicing through the silence. Dallas, a city living off subsidies, its people rotting in hospital beds, begging for discounted medicine. Nothing more than a burden? The insult cracked like a whip and the room gasped in disbelief. He pressed harder, voice ringing with disdain. If this is what America calls a healthcare hub, then this country is pitiful. Reporters froze, mid-scribble, murmurs rising. The chairman, Ellis Trent, shifted uneasily, while digital analyst Marisol Drake whispered, "This just went nuclear." The cameras cut back to Crockett, her knuckles white around the files. The voiceover thundered, "When millions are mocked as worthless, can one woman strike back and silence the man who laughs at their pain?" The silence from Johnson's last taunt clung to the chamber like smoke after an explosion. All eyes locked on Jasmine Crockett, waiting to see if she would crack under the insult. But she didn't shuffle her papers or scramble for statistics. She rose slowly, every motion deliberate, the fire in her eyes visible even through the camera lenses. Her voice came low, but steady, cutting through the tension. "I won't throw spreadsheets at you," she began. "I'm going to tell you something real, something you cannot laugh away." Gas rippled as she lifted her chin. "Years ago, my mother collapsed at home. No warning, no time to prepare. Her heart stopped, and we thought we had already lost her. She was rushed through Dallas traffic, straight into the emergency wing of UT Southwestern. And there, while our family stood helpless, doctors fought to bring her back. They pulled her from the edge of death. Dallas saved my mother's life, and Dallas saves lives every single day." Her words struck the room with raw force. She raised a hand, signaling. The chamber screens flickered alive. The image of Dr. Samuel Keating, a senior cardiothoracic surgeon at UT Southwestern, appeared. His face was lined with fatigue, the kind that comes from decades on the front lines of medicine. His voice carried both gravity and conviction. "Dallas saves thousands every year," Dr. Keating declared, eyes locked on the camera as if staring straight into the chamber. "We don't measure worth in subsidies, we measure it in heartbeats restored and families kept whole. I was there when we brought Congresswoman Crockett's mother back, and I've been there for countless others. This city is no burden. It is a lifeline." The video ended. Silence followed, heavy, suffocating silence. You could hear chairs creak, papers shuffle nervously. Reporters clutched their pens, but didn't dare write. Staffers froze mid-motion. For one moment, the chamber belonged entirely to that memory, that testimony, that undeniable truth. Then came the sneer. Johnson leaned forward, his voice dripping disdain. "One surgery doesn't make Dallas a healthcare hub," he scoffed. "One lucky save doesn't change the fact your city feeds on Washington handouts. Emotional stories don't set national policy." His laughter followed like nails on glass, cruel and calculated. The crowd recoiled. Gasps, whispers, and mutters swirled. The insult wasn't just a dismissal, it was a blade twisted into a mother's near death, into the pride of a city that had carried millions. But Jasmine did not flinch. She stood taller, eyes, narrowing fury sharpened into steel. "Is that right, Mr. Speaker?" she fired back. "Funny, because in 2019, at a fundraising dinner right here in Dallas, you called it, your words, the heart of America." The chamber froze again. Jasmine's voice cut like lightning. "You praised its hospitals. You praised its workers. You praised its people. You said," she raised her voice to a roar, "Dallas carries the spirit of this nation in every hallway, every ward, every emergency room." So tell us, were you lying then, or are you lying now? The screens lit once more. Grainy footage from 2019 rolled across the chamber walls. Mike Johnson stood behind a glittering podium tuxedo, crisp smile-wide donors applauding around him. His voice filled the chamber, damning in its clarity. Dallas is the heart of America. Dallas shows the strength of our healthcare, the strength of our people. If you want to see the soul of this country, look no further than this city. The President Johnson sat frozen, his smirk gone color draining from his face. The footage cut out, leaving only his silence. Reporters exploded into motion, shouting questions, snapping photos, pounding keyboards. Lawmakers turned in their seats, some glaring, some shaking their heads in disbelief. The chairman, Ellis Trent, hammered his gavel, his face grim, but the noise wouldn't stop. Marisol Drake leaned forward in the press gallery, whispering into her recorder. He's been caught in his own words. This is a political detonation. Jasmine remained standing, the storm swirling around her unshaken. So what changed, Mr. Johnson? She demanded, her voice booming, amplified by fury and truth. Because Dallas hasn't. Its doctors haven't. Its families haven't. The only thing that changed is you. Her words hung in the air like a final strike, a blade lodged deep where no denial could reach. For the first time that day, the Speaker of the House had nothing. No smirk, no sneer, no answer. Only silence. The chamber was still buzzing from the footage of Johnson's old speech when he suddenly straightened his face, hardening into defiance. His voice rose harsh and arrogant, slicing through the murmurs. I come from Louisiana, he declared, jabbing a finger at the air, a state with real leadership experience. Dallas only knows how to demand. That's all your city is good for. His words hung in the air, like poison meant to claw back control of the moment. Jasmine turned slowly, her expression unshaken, eyes blazing. She stepped closer to the microphone, her tone sharp as steel. Tell me something, Mr. Johnson, she shot back. In your home parish of Rapides, how many major hospitals stand ready to take patients from across the nation? How many world-class research centers drive medical breakthroughs? How many medical schools train the next generation of doctors? Each question landed like a blow, pounding his arrogance into silence. The monitors on the chamber wall flickered again. A map appeared, its contrast brutal and undeniable. On one side, Dallas glowed with clusters of hospitals, research towers, and medical schools, a sprawling network of more than 150,000 healthcare professionals. On the other side, Rapides Parish showed only a handful of small facilities, scattered and fragile. The comparison was devastating, the screen itself, like a witness testifying against him. Gasps rippled through the audience, lawmakers shaking their heads. Jasmine's hand slammed down on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. She leaned forward, her voice low but fierce, every word dripping with contempt. Dallas feeds this nation. Dallas carries the sick, the wounded, the forgotten. Dallas keeps America alive. She pointed straight at him, eyes locked. Your hometown can't even feed itself, let alone the country. That's the truth you're too afraid to face. The words detonated in the room like a charge set to blow. Johnson's face flushed crimson, his jaw tightening until it looked like stone. He shot up in his seat, his voice breaking into a furious roar. Don't you lecture me, he shouted, spit flying from his lips. Don't you dare compare my state to your city of illusions. Dallas is nothing but a fantasy, a hollow shell pretending to matter. His fist slammed against the desk, rattling the microphones. The rage was raw, unfiltered, the mask of control finally torn away. The chamber erupted in chaos. Some lawmakers leaned forward, shouting for order, while others whispered furiously into phones. Reporters scrambled to capture every second, cameras zooming so tight they caught beads of sweat rolling down Johnson's temples. Ellis Trent's gavel hammered against wood, his voice hoarse, order in the chamber. But the noise wouldn't die down. The confrontation had crossed into open war, every word a weapon, every glare a blade. Cameras cut from face to face, capturing the storm. Marisol Drake whispered under her breath, "This is history in real time." Staffers rushed along the aisles, whispering frantic instructions to their bosses, but no one looked away from the clash. Jasmine stood unbowed, her chest rising and falling, with steady resolve, while Johnson shook with fury, veins standing out on his neck. For the audience at home, it was no longer a policy debate. It was a duel to the death fought in front of the nation. The roar from Johnson's last outburst still rang in the rafters when Jasmine raised her hand. "Call the witness," she ordered, her voice sharp enough to slice through the noise. The doors opened, and a man in uniform stepped into the chamber. His limp was slight but visible, and the metals across his chest gleamed under the lights. He sat down slowly, placed his palms on the table, and lifted his eyes to the lawmaker staring down at him. The room hushed as if the walls themselves leaned closer. Jasmine leaned toward her microphone. "Please state your name and where you're from." The man cleared his throat. "Sergeant Aaron Miles, United States Army retired, born and raised in Alexandria, Louisiana." His voice carried the weight of years' gravel and pain in equal measure. 2 tours in Iraq, 1 bad knee, and a heart that almost quit on me last spring. He paused, steadying himself. Then his words came in waves, raw and direct. "I collapsed in my kitchen. 1 minute I was reaching for a glass of water, the next I was on the floor, gasping while my wife screamed for help. They rushed me to a local clinic in Rapides. I'll never forget the doctor's face. He didn't look at me like a soldier or even like a man. He looked at me like a problem he couldn't solve. He told us I'd have to wait weeks for a specialist, maybe longer. Weeks I didn't have." The chamber leaned in, silent but restless. Sergeant Miles's voice cracked, but he pushed forward. 2 days later, it happened again. Worse this time. I collapsed in front of my granddaughter and she thought I was dead. My wife was crying, begging for help, but they said there was nothing more they could do for me locally. Nothing more. That's when she made the choice. She loaded me in the truck and we drove through the night straight to Dallas. He exhaled slowly, a tremor running through his words. When we reached UT Southwestern, it was like a different world. Doctors and nurses didn't turn me away. They didn't tell me to wait. They surrounded me, they moved fast, and they saved me. Those people in Dallas brought me back. If it wasn't for Dallas, I wouldn't be sitting here. If it wasn't for Dallas, I would have died. His last line landed like a hammer, echoing against the chamber walls. The audience held its breath, every syllable wrapping the room in heavy silence. Jasmine's eyes burned with gratitude and fury, but she stayed quiet, letting his words hang where they needed to. For a moment, the nation's capital felt like a funeral, reverent and frozen. Then Mike Johnson leaned into his microphone with a sneer curling at his lips. "One personal story can't stand for the whole nation," he said. His tone dripped disdain, as if he had swatted away a nuisance. Gasps rippled through the rows and heads turned in disbelief. Jasmine's response came like a gunshot. "Then I have 1,000 stories like this." She raised her hand sharply. "Roll it." The technicians obeyed. The chamber dimmed, the monitors sparked alive, and the first video filled the air. On screen, a woman in a faded floral dress sat at her kitchen table. Her voice trembled, but her eyes never wavered. "My husband had a stroke on a Sunday. No one would take him in Alexandria. They said, 'Come back Monday.' We drove to Dallas instead. Dallas saved us." The clip cut to a bus driver with a cap pulled low, his hands trembling as he spoke. "I dropped to the floor of my bus. Next thing I knew, I was waking up in a Dallas hospital. Dallas saved me." The montage built with pounding rhythm. A paramedic described handing off a teenager bleeding out after a crash. Dallas saved him. An elderly couple held hands, oxygen tubing trailing from their faces. Together they said, "Dallas saved us." A young teacher, still pale from illness, stood in her empty classroom. "Dallas saved me." A veteran in a wheelchair saluted the camera. "Dallas saved me." Each voice was a blade carving away the last refuge of denial. When the final frame faded, the chamber went dead quiet. No coughs, no shuffling papers, not even the creak of leather chairs. All eyes turned toward Johnson, whose face had lost its color. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple, glistening under the lights. For the first time, the Speaker of the House looked small, cornered and alone, and the silence that followed was louder than any gavel. The silence that followed the veteran's testimony was suffocating, the kind of quiet that made even the hum of the cameras sound loud. For a moment, it seemed as if the chamber had reached its peak, until Jasmine Crockett's hand rose again, steady and deliberate. Her eyes locked on Mike Johnson like crosshairs, and her voice carried the weight of inevitability. "If stories are not enough for you, then let's talk about your own words," she said, her tone heavy with warning. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing another blow was about to fall. She lifted a folder, crisp and marked with the seal of confidentiality. The click of the clasp echoed across the chamber as she pulled out a document thick with bold black print. This, Jasmine declared, raising it high so the cameras could see, is a leaked transcript from an internal strategy meeting of your caucus held on June 14th, 2022, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. She placed it flat on the table and pressed her palm against it like a final nail being driven in. And in it, Mr. Johnson, you are quoted word for word. The crowd froze, leaning forward in anticipation. Jasmine's voice rang out, quoting directly. You said, and I quote, if Dallas gets more health care funding, our party will lose control of black voters and immigrant voters. The words detonated like a bomb and the chamber erupted. Gasps turned into shouts, reporters leapt to their feet, and the crack of camera shutters became a storm of light. Ellis Trent's gavel pounded helplessly against the wood, drowned by the chaos exploding inside the hall. The revelation didn't just sting, it ripped open the truth for everyone to see. Mike Johnson's face went pale, the smirk long gone. His lips pulled back in a snarl, and he grabbed for his microphone like a drowning man clutching for air. This is a fake, he roared, his voice cracking with fury. This is a cheap forgery. Lies manufactured to smear me. He slammed his palm against the desk paper, scattering like frightened birds. But his outrage only made him look cornered, every shout feeding the flames of scandal already spreading through the chamber. Flashes exploded as journalists scrambled to capture the moment. One reporter shouted, Mr. Johnson, did you or did you not attend that June 14th meeting? Another yelled, are you denying these words are yours? His answers dissolved into noise, defensive bluster lost under the avalanche of voices. The chamber had transformed into a battlefield of truth and denial. Every lens aimed at him, every pen slashing down his downfall. He tried to push back, but the fury in his voice only betrayed his fear. Jasmine stood calm amid the storm, the only figure in control. She waited for the shouting to subside, her silence louder than Johnson's rage. Then she leaned into her microphone, her eyes unblinking, her words sharp as steel. This is not forged, she said. This is not rumor. This is your own hand, your own ink. She flipped the final page of the document, holding it up to the camera so the signature was plain for all to see. Here is your signature, Mr. Johnson, right at the bottom. The chamber went dead still again, as if the entire room had inhaled but forgotten to breathe out. On the screens overhead, zoomed images of his signature blazed in high definition. There was no escape, no wiggle room, no explanation that could dissolve what the nation could see with its own eyes. You didn't just mock Dallas. Jasmine continued, her voice steady and merciless. You plotted to strangle its funding, to deny its hospitals, to choke its lifeline, because you feared the power of its people. Every word carved deeper into the silence, a blade pressed against his throat. Johnson's mouth opened, but no sound came, his earlier roar collapsing into stunned quiet. He fumbled with his papers, eyes darting, sweat streaking down his temples under the relentless camera lights. The audience leaned in closer, the tension snapping tighter with each passing second. Some lawmakers whispered fiercely among themselves. Others simply shook their heads in disbelief. The sound of pens scratching across notepads filled the void, recording history as it unfolded. Jasmine slammed her palm on the table again, punctuating the air with finality. You didn't just insult Dallas, she declared, voice ringing through the chamber. You tried to cut off the right to live. You wanted to take away health care from black families, immigrant families, working families, all to protect your grip on power. Her words were fire, and the flames licked higher with every syllable. Johnson recoiled, his chair squealing as he pressed back against it, powerless under the weight of his own betrayal. The cameras captured everything, the frozen look on his face, the signed page gleaming under the lights, Jasmine Crockett towering above her desk like the executioner of hypocrisy. Flashbulbs fired again, each one a nail in his political coffin. The chairman's gavel cracked again and again, but this time the noise was drowned out by the thunder of the truth. Johnson sat cornered, exposed, his lies stripped bare in front of the nation, and Jasmine's final words cut through the chamber like a verdict delivered. You didn't just disrespect Dallas, she said, her voice unshakable. You tried to deny its people the right to live. The chamber exploded again, louder than before, a storm of outrage and disbelief crashing down on Mike Johnson. and all he could do was sit in silence, his signature burning like a brand before the eyes of America. The roar of outrage from the leaked memo still shook the chamber when Jasmine raised her hand for silence. She waited until the gavel strikes slowed, until the reporter's shouts dulled into background static. Then she leaned forward, eyes locked on Mike Johnson like a predator on wounded prey. Her voice came measured but sharp, a scalpel cutting to the bone. "Mr. Johnson," she said, each syllable crisp, "will you confirm before this body and before the American people that you once promised all communities deserve respect?" The words struck with the weight of a trap snapping shut. Johnson blinked hard, his jaw working as though he could chew the question into dust. He shifted in his chair, buying seconds, but the silence pressed down like iron. Camera lenses zoomed in, catching every twitch of his mouth, every flicker in his eyes. Reporters scribbled the scratch of pens filling the void. The speaker's lips parted, but no sound came. And that was when Jasmine raised her hand again and gave the signal. The chamber lights dimmed slightly and the screens on the walls flickered alive. Footage appeared grainy, but clear enough to sting like a knife. It was 2017, a town hall in Louisiana. Mike Johnson, standing before a banner that read, "Community First." His voice rang out, younger but unmistakable. "Every community in this nation deserves respect," Johnson said, gesturing with conviction. "It is our duty to honor them, to lift them, to ensure they are never left behind." The words rolled across the chamber like thunder, undeniable, inescapable. Gasps and murmurs erupted, lawmakers twisting in their seats to stare at Johnson. Some shook their heads, others let out bitter laughs. The reporters surged forward, flashes blinding in rapid fire, capturing the past, colliding with the present. Johnson sank deeper into his chair, his face drained of color. The contrast between then and now hung in the air like a noose tightening. Jasmine didn't need to say a word, the video had spoken for her. But she did speak, and when she did, it was like a blade through armor. "You have betrayed that promise," Jasmine declared, her voice fierce and steady. "You have betrayed the Constitution you swore to defend. And worst of all, you have betrayed the patients still gasping for air in hospital beds tonight." Her voice rose, carried by fury and grief. "You mocked Dallas. You dismissed the stories of veterans, mothers, children. You plotted to choke the very lifeline that saved them. And in doing so, you spat on your own oath." The chamber shook with a new wave of murmurs, but Johnson didn't move. His eyes darted once toward the exits, then back to the papers in front of him. His hands pressed flat against the desk, knuckles white, but the tremor in his fingers betrayed him. Camera crews caught it, all the sweat breaking across his brow, the shallow rise and fall of his chest, the way his lips pressed together as if holding back a scream. He looked less like a leader and more like a man cornered, stripped of every shield. Jasmine drove the point home, stacking the evidence like bricks on his coffin. The personal stories you laughed at, the testimony of Sergeant Miles, the voices of families across this nation, the transcript from your own caucus meeting, and now this, the promise you made with your own mouth, captured for history. This is not opinion. This is not spin. This is your record, Mr. Johnson, your words, your choices, your betrayal. Each phrase cracked like a whip, relentless, merciless. Reporters shouted questions, but none of them reached him. Johnson sat rigid, locked in place, as though the chair had become a trap. His skin glistened under the lights, beads of sweat crawling down his temples. His hands trembled visibly now, one fist clenching and unclenching, the other gripping the desk until the wood creaked. The mask of arrogance was gone. In its place was silence, the silence of a man undone by his own words. The cameras closed in, catching every detail, the shine of sweat, the twitch of fingers, the haunted stare of a politician with nowhere left to run. The nation would see it all. And in that moment, Jasmine Crockett stood unflinching, her fire burning against the backdrop of his collapse. She had not needed to shout. She had simply shown the truth, and the truth had broken him. As the chamber's shock condensed into a hard stillness, the outside world detonated in seconds. Newsrooms hit send anchors, cut to breaking banners, and headlines slammed across screens with brutal clarity. Crockett exposes Johnson, with leaked memo blazed in all caps, as clipped video of the signature looped on repeat. Commentators spoke over overlapping footage, their voices tight with adrenaline. The country could feel the floor tilt beneath the Capitol. Within minutes, push alerts flooded phones from coast to coast. A dozen outlets posted the memo scan lines highlighted like crime scene tape and the date circled in red. Local affiliates replayed the microphone slam, then freeze-framed Johnson's face at the exact moment denial met proof. A montage rolled the promise from 2017, the veteran's testimony, the ink on the final page. Each clip functioned like a fingerprint, unique yet undeniable. Online, the hearing video launched into orbit. The YouTube counter spun upwards so fast it looked animated, and the thumbnail burned across the trending page. Reaction channels went live, clipped the revelation, and stacked their titles with the same phrase, "Crockett exposes Johnson," with leaked memo. Comments poured in by the thousands raw, angry, disbelieving, grateful. The algorithm didn't need to be convinced. The audience did the lifting. A wave of viewers over 50, the crowd that rarely comments, began to type anyway. They told stories of long nights in emergency rooms and relatives revived by Dallas teams. "I don't usually post, but I had to say, thank you," one wrote, the line pinned at the top. Others argued fiercely under the clip, but the momentum only swelled. Every refresh forced the numbers higher. Then came the statement that cut through the noise like a siren. Major medical associations stepped to the microphones and issued a single unambiguous sentence. Dallas is not just a city, it is a front line that saves lives. Reporters captured the quote and fired it back onto the air within seconds. Hospital executives nodded behind the speakers' faces, drawn but resolute. The sentence traveled because it was simple and because it matched what people had just witnessed. Local clinicians added their voices without waiting for permission. A trauma nurse said on camera, "We do not measure worth in subsidies. We measure it in oxygen and pulse." A chief of medicine spoke quietly from a fluorescent hallway, promising beds would be found for whoever reached the doors. Paramedics posted helmet cam clips threaded with sirens and relief. The message was not polished, but it was credible, and credibility thunders. Meanwhile, pressure closed around Mike Johnson like a vice. Phones lit up inside his caucus as members texted staff to draft statements that said nothing at all. No comment became the phrase of the hour, delivered with tight smiles and wider space between photo ops. A senior ally canceled a scheduled joint appearance, citing scheduling conflicts, then stopped returning calls. Others stepped back 2 paces in the hallway and let cameras capture the distance. Cable panels replayed the loop, the quote, the memo, the signature, the sweat, the stare. The narrative wrote itself while he sat in the same chair, smaller with each replay. "We condemn any suggestion of targeting communities," one lawmaker said, choosing his words as if each might explode. Another added, "I have not reviewed the document," though the screenshot filled the banner beneath his face. The isolation was not loud, but it was visible, and visibility is fatal in this town. Talk radio lit up across morning and evening drives, boards jammed with callers who had watched the clip on repeat. Some choked up as they described Dallas nurses standing over their beds. Others demanded that leaders stop treating lives like campaign math. Community forums filled with simple, unsparing verdicts saw the signature. "That's all I needed." On YouTube, the red live badge glowed as hosts replayed the key minute, and the chat scrolled faster than eyes could follow. By nightfall, the hearing sat at the very top of trending, and even entertainment channels paused to point their audiences to the full video. Inside the Capitol, footsteps slowed whenever Johnson rounded a corner. Colleagues nodded politely, then kept moving phones to ears. Eyes down, proximity recalculated in real time. Staffers circulated talking points that emphasized process and avoided his name altogether. "We're focused on policy," a spokesperson read to a semicircle of microphones, careful to never defend the memo or the sentence within it. The criticism washed over him in waves, and the people closest to him had stepped back far enough for the cameras to notice the gap. By the time the elevators closed, aides were whispering one instruction: keep your head down, say nothing, and let the headline burn on its own. No one volunteered to put out the fire today. As the headlines hardened and allies stepped back, the next shockwave hit. Jasmine's name surged across tickers and timelines like a siren, and the phrase "hero of patience" began to stick. Evening broadcasts replayed her stare down and stitched it beside families who said Dallas saved them. Callers flooded radio shows to thank her for saying what they had lived. In a town that eats headlines for breakfast, her courage felt like a meal people actually needed. Momentum jumped from screens to the Capitol's marble floors. Committee chairs, huddled staffers drafted summaries, and a familiar file returned to the docket with fresh ink. The Medicaid expansion bill, long stalled in procedural mud, was formally restarted. Dallas was written into speeches as the emblem, the example everyone could picture without a chart. Hearing schedules appeared that paired actuaries with trauma nurses, spreadsheets with survivors. Sponsors lined up, some reading from note cards and others speaking from the gut. Dallas is not a talking point, one member said on the House steps. Dallas is a model for how we save lives. The bill's briefing materials open with a photo of the city skyline and a pull quote, "Respect Dallas, respect lives." A junior aide pinned a tiny Pegasus on her lapel and whispered, "Let them know where this started." Inside caucus rooms, the weather turned cold around Mike Johnson. Members who once crowded his cameras now hesitated at doorways and drifted farther down the rope line. A moderate from the suburbs phoned colleagues and said, "We need a leadership conversation." Another sent a memo that asked bluntly, "How long can we carry this?" No one volunteered to stand next to him at the microphones. By midweek, the distancing became a strategy, not a rumor. A joint fundraiser became postponed, then disappeared from the calendar. Donors asked for space and clarity, code words everyone understood. A senior committee chair told a reporter on background, "We're exploring options." In the corridors, the phrase "change" at the top rode on lowered voices and quick glances. On the streets, outrage found its banner and its echo. Crowds assembled across state lines with hand-painted signs that read, "Respect Dallas, respect lives." Veterans in ball caps and grandparents with folding chairs stood beside nurses, still in scrubs. Outside state capitals, chants rolled like engines, "Respect Dallas, respect lives." In front of hospitals, candlelight turned sidewalks into quiet seas. The scale widened by the hour. Phoenix, Milwaukee, Charlotte, and Nashville marched at noon. By dusk, Portland and Miami answered back. Aerial shots showed highways of people moving in rhythm, their signs flashing the same words. A woman on a bullhorn shouted, "We are not bargaining chips," and the crowd repeated it until the windows shook. A former patient lifted a scar to the camera and said, "I'm alive because a Dallas team refused to let me die." Back in Washington, Jasmine walked the halls while aides handed her fresh folders. She thanked janitors by name and hugged a nurse who had flown in to testify. Reporters asked whether Hero of Patience felt heavy to carry. She said the patients carried more. In committee, she pointed at the Dallas photo and said, "This is a promise, not a prop." The room nodded, some with eyes glassy, none with arms crossed. Meanwhile, Mike Johnson sat at a long table and faced the arithmetic of isolation. Staff placed a phone list in front of him that used to mean power and now meant unanswered calls. A deputy advised keep comments brief and another whispered, "Avoid hall cameras." Moderates drafted a letter asking for an orderly leadership transition and shopped for signatures in hushed loops. When he stepped toward a bank of microphones, the line beside him stayed empty. The protests kept multiplying, not just in size, but in purpose. Organizers set up tables for Medicaid sign-ups under tents printed with "Respect Dallas, respect lives." Volunteers directed veterans to clinic representatives while church groups passed out bottled water. At dusk, people read the names of those lost when care came too late, and someone struck a bell between each name. A pair of teenagers held a poster that said, "Hero of Patience," and their grandmother squeezed their hands and whispered, "She's the reason I'm here." Nearby, a retired surgeon pressed a palm to the Dallas skyline on his sign and said, "This city taught us what duty looks like." The chant restarted, steady and relentless. "Respect Dallas, respect lives." News helicopters traced the words with spotlights, and the glow washed over hospital windows like a vow kept. Pollsters called it a surge. Patients called it justice. Editorials used the phrase "hero of patience" without quotation marks now, as if it had always belonged to her. Talk show hosts asked callers to share Dallas stories, and the board lit up before the number finished airing. In living rooms and waiting rooms, people said the same quiet line to the screen, "She fought for us." The nickname no longer felt like a title, it felt like a trust. On Capitol Hill, the revived bill moved from summary to markup with a speed that startled even veterans of the process. Staffers flagged provisions that strengthened urban-rural transfer networks and expanded emergency reimbursement, and Dallas was cited as the model case. A witness list formed that paired hospital chiefs with ambulance coordinators and patient advocates, all ready to say the same thing: respect lives. Outside demonstrators waved the Dallas skyline beside the bill number and the slogan, and inside members who once hedged now raised their hands to co-sponsor. By the weekend, the protest map looked like a constellation. Dallas pulsed at the center, but stars flared in Detroit, Columbus, Albuquerque, and Boise. Marchers carried stickers reading, "Respect Dallas." Respect lives their steps steady as drums. A courthouse choir turned the slogan into a call and response that rattled bricks. As candles dimmed, a veteran lifted his cap and the crowd answered with one line: "Respect lives. Dallas strong." The wave of protests had barely cooled when a quieter surge took over the airwaves. Call-in lines filled with deeper voices weathered by time, asking the producers to hold the line just a little longer. A man said he was 72 and had watched his brother fade because he couldn't afford the pills that kept him breathing. A woman said her husband was sent home twice with chest pain because the clinic didn't take their plan. Another caller, voice shaking, said she buried a son and still owed the hospital. The control rooms didn't need prompts. They just let the stories run. On a local morning show, a retired machinist with oil-stained hands held a photo of his late wife. He told the host she had begged the front desk to see someone, anyone, and was told to try the free clinic next week. He said the ambulance that finally came went straight past the small hospital and drove them to Dallas. He said a team there worked the night like it was war, and he watched a monitor climb back to life. He said he wished that chance had come sooner before her body couldn't take another hour. He didn't cry on camera, but everyone else did. In Cleveland, a grandmother sat on a plaid couch and spoke straight into a laptop camera. She said a doctor told her to choose between rent and an MRI that might catch her cancer early. She chose rent, then lost her hair anyway, and only Dallas had a trial that took her in. She said a nurse squeezed her hand and told her she mattered, and nobody had said that in months. She said she lived to see her grandbaby start school, and she wanted other people to live long enough to do the same. The chat filled with hearts and simple words. Same here. Producers realized the callers were mostly over 50, and they moved the segments to prime time. A former trucker described being turned away for insulin because his coverage lapsed when he changed routes. He said he drove to Dallas on a prayer and a map because a cousin told him they would not turn him away. He laughed once short and rough and said the nurses scolded him for waiting, then saved him anyway. He said he mailed them a thank you card with cash, and they mailed it back with a note that said, "Just stay alive." The studio went quiet and the host wiped his eyes. National talk shows seized the moment and booked everyone who could speak with authority and heat. A host opened with the Chiron Dallas and medical justice and told viewers they would hear hard truths without a filter. A retired paramedic, a hospital CEO, and a health economist took their seats under bright lights. The opposing chair went to a strategist who defended funding cuts with a smile that never reached his eyes. The clips of the hearing rolled the signature blazing across the screen like a brand. The host said Dallas is the new symbol of medical justice, and the panel erupted. The paramedic leaned forward and said, "Care is measured in minutes, not slogans." He said Dallas keeps a line open for transfers because the city treats every bed like a promise. The CEO said budgets are real, but lives are more real, and the numbers must bend when a heart stops. The economist said the cheapest policy is saving people before they crash on the kitchen floor. The strategist said none of this proved Dallas deserved more, and the host said the country had already decided. The lower third flashed Dallas symbol standard Lifeline. In the middle of the second hour, cameras switched to a live feed from a local station in Texas. A mother stood beside a couch with crayon drawings taped behind her, and her hands shook as she gripped the microphone. She said her daughter's lungs failed in the night, and they drove until the skyline looked like a promise. She tried to keep her voice steady, but it cracked anyway, and she pressed a tissue to her face. Then she lifted her head and said, "Jasmine speaks for our hearts." The anchor bowed her head and let the silence say the rest. That clip flooded every platform in minutes and climbed into the top slot across feeds. Viewers didn't argue about policy under that post. They just wrote the names of people they lost. A nurse in scrubs typed between shifts and said she remembered that family and that night. A pastor said his church would take up a collection for the clinic fund next Sunday. A granddaughter pasted a selfie with her grandmother's oxygen line and wrote, "Dallas kept us." The comment that stuck at the top was 3 words: she spoke truth. Meanwhile, Mike Johnson's name sat beneath a different set of words that hardened like wet cement. Headlines paired his photo with terms like callousness and cold calculus, and the phrase career in crisis began to recur. Editorial cartoons drew him holding scissors over an IV line, and telecasts contrasted his denial with the audio of his promise from years ago. Even friendly outlets ran neutral tones that sounded like distance, not defense. The shift was not a shout. It was a steady turning away. Everyone could feel the ground move under him. Political boxes started checking themselves. Donors asked aides whether this could be stabilized, then quietly paused scheduled transfers. A pair of committee chairs drafted statements reaffirming respect for all communities without using his name. A whip count on the leadership line returned numbers no one liked to see. The phrase loss of confidence floated through the hallways like a chill. Reporters repeated it until it became the air. Back on set, the debate sharpened as the night wore on, and viewers refused to look away. The host replayed the mother's tearful line and asked the strategist whether any budget could excuse what the memo said. The strategist stammered that the quote was taken out of context, and the paramedic said the context was a body on the floor. The CEO said Dallas had absorbed patients other cities pushed aside, and the economist said that saved money and lives together. The host asked the camera why this was even a debate. The audience cheered like it was a verdict. Local radio, the kind older listeners keep on the kitchen counter, filled with simple calls that cut deep. A man said he was 68, and the only thing he wanted from Washington was not to be hung out to dry. A woman said she had never liked politicians much, but she believed Jasmine because she heard a daughter in her voice. Another caller said he voted differently most years, but would never forget that signature in those words. The host let the pauses stretch until they became their own kind of proof. In the breaks, the station played softer songs. In an evening town hall, a room full of seniors stood to speak one by one with folded notes. A widow said the denial letter came the same day her husband's cough turned dangerous. She said a doctor in Dallas called her ma'am and told her to sit while they worked, and it was the first time she felt safe in months. She said leaders who treat people like numbers forget that numbers bury people. She pointed at the camera and said the hearing gave her permission to be loud. The room applauded in long, steady waves. Across the country, retirees who rarely posted started new accounts just to comment on the hearing. They wrote about choosing between pills and groceries and about long drives to hospitals that would take them. Some attached scanned copies of discharge papers and insurance denials as if the screen were a courthouse. Others simply wrote Dallas and let the name carry the rest. Younger viewers pinned those comments to the top. For once, the internet felt like a witness stand. The talk shows returned to the tune the next day because the ratings did not fall. They rose. Guests wore small pins shaped like the Dallas skyline, and the host held up a card that read, "Respect lives." A medical resident dialed in from a call room and said she stayed because the faces stayed with her. A retired firefighter said he never wanted to see another family begging the front desk to be seen. The host closed the segment by saying, "Dallas has become the new symbol of medical justice." No one on the panel argued. In Congress, the whispers about Mike grew louder because the cameras could hear them now. A caucus member shrugged on live TV and said, "We need to talk about leadership." Another said, "We want to move forward without distractions," and everyone understood the code. Staffers floated a trial balloon about new voices and watched it rise without resistance. A committee aide joked that the elevators took longer when he was inside because everyone got off. Laughs died quickly when they remembered the microphones. Back on air, producers ran a split screen on the left, the mother in Dallas wiping her eyes. On the right, Mike Johnson wiping sweat from his brow at a lectern. The host asked viewers to listen to the two voices and decide which one sounded like America. Callers lined up before the invitation finished, and the control room started color-coding the flood. An oncology nurse said she had held too many hands to be polite about it anymore. A grandfather said he wanted his grandkids to live in a country that knows a hospital bed is not a favor. A chorus formed without a conductor. Editorial pages moved from cautious to clear. One paper wrote that empathy is not a weakness in government, it is the point of government. Another called Dallas a lighthouse in a storm built by human hands, and the line got read aloud on cable. A third one said Mike Johnson had traded duty for dominance and was losing both. The opinion pages were not always kind to Jasmine before, but they were unanimous now. The tone had changed because the country had changed it. The producers who track viewer demographics noted something rare. Men over 50 were staying through the breaks. They were not fast-forwarding, not flipping to sports, not muting the guests they disagreed with. They watched the hearing highlights again and tipped their hats in the comments like it was a construction site. They wrote that they did not want their wives to fight for oxygen because a spreadsheet said no. They wrote that Dallas earned the right to be loud. And through it all, Mike's image shrank until it felt smaller than the caption under his name. He tried to frame the memo as mischaracterized, then as misquoted, then as misused, and each attempt sounded thinner than the last. Allies stopped booking him because the green room turned into a gauntlet. Opponents no longer needed to raise their voices. They just pointed at the screen and let the clip roll. The verdict formed not in a courtroom, but in living rooms and kitchen chairs. His career didn't end in a day, but everyone could see it wobble at the base. By the end of the week, the phrase symbol of callousness trailed him like a shadow he couldn't outrun. Every time he stepped to a microphone, the questions came back to the same four beats. The stories, the talk shows, the mother's line, the signature. He could dodge a question, but he could not dodge the footage. Pollsters stopped asking whether viewers had seen the clip and started asking how many times. The answer was always enough. And the nation kept watching, not because it loved politics, but because it finally felt heard. The outrage that reshaped the week settles into a charged stillness as the House reconvenes. Cameras refocus, red lights steady, and the murmur fades to a single expectant hush. The clerk finishes procedural language, and the dais turns toward the center aisle. Jasmine Crockett rises without hurry, a folder in one hand and the room in the other. She steps to the microphone, breathes once, and lets the silence carry the weight for her. Every seat leans forward as if pulled by a wire. Her voice is clear, even and close to the ground. She does not try to outshout the headlines. She speaks to the people in the room and the families beyond it. She thanks the chair, then looks out over the chamber, left, right, gallery, press. She says they heard stories that were not numbers, and they saw proof that was not spin. She says hospitals do not ask for a party when a heart stops, and ambulances do not quiz a patient about turnout. She says duty looks the same in every zip code when a life hangs by a thread. She names the stakes in plain words, the kind that cannot be misunderstood. She says the bill before them is not perfect, but it is a start, and a start has saved more lives than a speech ever will. She says Dallas held the line while others shut their doors, and that deserves more than a nod. It deserves support. She says the promise they make tonight is simple. When a call comes, care answers. She says that promise must belong to everyone, not just to those who can pay for it. She lets the last sentence hang, then grips the lectern with both hands. The chamber is quiet enough to hear a page turn. Jasmine keeps her gaze level and brings it home with words she has carried like a banner. No city is small when a life needs saving, she says, and the line lands like a bell in a storm. It is not fancy, it is final. The words echo once, twice, as if the ceiling itself repeats them back. For a heartbeat, the room does not breathe, and then everything breaks at once. Sound crashes through the hall like surf. Chairs scrape back as members rise to their feet in a rolling wave. The first applause hits, then a second. Then 1,000 hands meet in a rhythm that will not stop. Staffers at the walls clap until programs slip from their fingers and tumble to the carpet. The press gallery stands too, cameras bobbing as photographers try to cheer and shoot at the same time. The applause does not thin. It thickens, building into a long, steady roar that fills the chamber from flag to clock. The gavel taps once for order and is swallowed whole. It takes a full minute for the sound to fall to something the microphones can shape. The chair thanks the members and moves the House to the question. The clerk reads the title of the measure in a voice trained for clarity under pressure. The roll call lights blink awake on the board, a grid of waiting squares. Those in favor shall vote, yeah, those opposed nay, the clerk says, and the room holds its breath again. Fingers hover over buttons like a countdown no one wants to miss. Green begins to spread across the wall, first in dots, then in rows. A red light appears, then two, then stalls, as if uncertainty can feel the air shifting around it. Members lean toward the board, lips, tight eyes fixed. A ripple of whispering moves through the chamber, numbers, thresholds, names. The gallery watches the grid, like a heart monitor, each new green a beat. A staffer in the aisle does silent math on his fingers and nods once at no one. The count tips past the number that matters, and the room reacts as if the floor rose an inch. A cheer bursts and breaks, then folds into a second standing ovation that rolls from the back row forward. The chair raps the gavel hard enough to leave a mark and intones the words the nation waits to hear. On this vote, the yeas are in the majority. The bill is passed. The sentence lands like a door thrown open on a dark house. Members hug, shake hands, and press knuckles to their eyes. Jasmine stands still, letting the sound wash over her without trying to shape it. She closes her eyes for a second, opens them, and nods once at the board. The cameras catch that small motion and send it everywhere at once. On the floor, a cluster of nurses in the gallery hold each other and exhale as if they've been underwater. A veteran in the back lifts two fingers in a quiet salute and lowers them again. The applause softens to something like relief. The chair recognizes a procedural motion brief and carefully worded. A resolution is read that does not change the law, but names the moment. It states that the House recognizes the city of Dallas for its extraordinary service and resilience in the protection of human life. It continues with a line crafted to be quoted and remembered. It concludes, "In the judgment of this body, Dallas is the heart of America's healthcare." The phrase arrives in the chamber like a banner unfurled. There is no debate, there is only assent. The motion is adopted by unanimous consent, the kind of decision that becomes a story families tell later. A staffer brings a framed copy of the language to the well and sets it on an easel where the lights can find it. The seal at the top glints and the words in the center are large enough to read from the gallery. People lift their phones not to post, but to save as if they might need to touch the proof again tomorrow. The phrase feels solid under the lights. Jasmine does not step forward for a victory lap. She steps back so the resolution can stand by itself. The chair invites the gallery to remain seated as members file down the aisle for a brief acknowledgement. Hands are shaken without talking because words would clutter the air. A nurse presses her palm to her chest and mouths, "Thank you," and Jasmine taps the folder once in reply. The veteran who testified earlier nods and she nods back. The clerk's desk collects copies that will go into the record. The room does not empty quickly, it settles. Side conversations are quiet and short practical things about next steps that can wait until morning. The sergeant-at-arms stands at ease near the door, letting the moment be what it is. The press gallery snaps a last set of photos of the board, the dais, the framed resolution, the faces. The sound now is shoes on carpet and pages being slid into envelopes. No one needs a statement, the vote is the statement. The chair gavels the session adjourned for the evening, but the echo of the line still moves in the room. No city is small when a life needs saving, the screens seem to remember. Members collect their things slowly, reluctant to be the first to break the circle of air the line created. Someone straightens a flag as they pass, and another lifts a fallen program from the aisle and sets it on a chair. The lights dim by a whisper, not a notch, letting the seals glow a little longer. The chamber feels for once like a place that kept its promise. Outside the doors, the corridor is a river moving at human speed. Staffers trade exhausted smiles and tuck extra copies of the resolution into folders already too full. A Capitol police officer steps aside to let a nurse through and says, "Congratulations, ma'am," as if he is thanking her for something else. The marble floors pick up the last stray claps and turn them into a hush that follows the crowd to the elevators. At the threshold, Jasmine pauses and looks back once. The board is dark now, but the words remain. Down in the rotunda, the echo returns like a chorus learned in an hour. Visitors who watch from overflow rooms gather under the dome and stare at their phones in the reflected light. A child reads the resolution title out loud and asks what judgment of this body means, and her grandfather answers in smaller words. A paramedic in a wrinkled uniform sits on the step and closes his eyes for 10 seconds, then stands up straighter than before. A pair of custodians high-five without a sound. The night outside is cool and wide. On the Capitol steps, there is no rally, only a quiet crowd that does not want to leave yet. People take turns photographing the framed copy through the window like it is a relic. A man in a suit says, "We did something good today," to no one in particular, and a woman in scrubs replies, "We finally did." The city below thrums, unaware and entirely aware at the same time. Somewhere a siren rises and falls, and someone steps aside to let it pass. The line is already out there, carving its own path. Back in the chamber, lights settle into their overnight glow, and the seal above the dais stands watch. The microphones are off, but the desk lamps still show where the votes were cast. The framed resolution waits on its easel for a staffer to carry it to the hallway wall, where other plain hard-won words live. On the clerk's ledger, the page is signed and numbered and placed where it cannot be lost. The room exhales, then goes quiet. In the official record, the summary will be sterile motion reading passage resolution. In memory, it will be different because memory keeps the sound of the applause and the look on faces when the board turned green. It keeps the exact weight of the sentence that closed the speech and opened the vote. It keeps the way the phrase "Heart of America's Healthcare" felt both new and overdue. It keeps what the microphones cannot, the certainty that just this once the room lived up to its name. And it keeps the simple truth that no city is small when a life needs saving. The gavel had fallen, the vote had been read, and the chamber still hummed with the aftershock. Applause faded into a charged quiet, the kind that carries more power than noise. Jasmine stood firm at her desk, hands resting on the folder that had become her shield and her weapon. She turned toward the cameras, her eyes unwavering, her voice lowered but heavy enough to strike the room once more. The silence leaned in, waiting for a final line to etch itself into history. Her words came slow, deliberate, like stones laid on sacred ground. "Politics may divide us into parties," she said, each phrase hitting the air with force. "But human life is not something to be bartered." The line rolled across the chamber, over the galleries and into the microphones that fed it to millions. Faces in the crowd shifted, some nodding, some bowing, some blinking against tears. She did not pause long enough for the meaning to fade. She pressed forward with the rhythm of a hammer. "One politician can be brought down," Jasmine continued, her tone sharpening into a verdict, "but the truth will never fall." The sentence landed like a blade, striking steel, final and unbreakable. For a moment, the chamber seemed to hold its breath again, as if daring anyone to challenge her. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the gavel that had been ready for order stayed still. The cameras captured it all, panning slowly, deliberately, like eyes refusing to blink. They showed Mike Johnson with his shoulders caved in, his head bowed to fire, gone from his face. He sat crushed under the weight of his own words, sweat shining on his temples. Then the lens cut upward, catching Jasmine, standing tall, chin, lifted eyes set not on her rival, but on the horizon beyond him. One figure broken the other unbowed. The contrast said more than speeches ever could. The broadcast froze on that frame, the image seared into memory, Mike Johnson defeated and Jasmine Crockett unshaken. And as the feed rolled across the nation, the closing message rang like a bell that would not stop echoing. Politics may fracture, but life cannot be bargained. Power may fall, but truth never will. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.